But there are other aspects of this paper, especially philosophy, which we should not be forgetting when we discuss this paper. First, think about this very word modernism. And you know that there are some related words also which you might have come across. You come across a word like modernity, you come across a basic word modern, you also come across the word modernist. And if you see uses of all these words in different contexts, then you can probably better understand what is involved in each concept. Similarly, when we try to understand the word modernism, we must also see its difference from and its relationship to some other major terms, which often this word is contrasted with, or often this word is seen in opposition to those words, modernism. Then there is also another issue about considering this word modernism as a kind of time bound concept. That means something which developed at a particular point of time, it had a beginning and it had its end. So that means that is our time bound notion of modernism. But we can also have a different notion of modernism, where modernism can simply refer to a particular genre, it can refer to a particular attitude, it can refer to a particular stance, a particular temper, or a particular style. And in fact, all these things also apply to the concept of postmodernism. So, postmodernism as a style, as a particular genre, as a particular temper, as against defining the concept in relation to a certain period. So, here we see that a lot is involved. Then we also see whether this particular concept is to be understood in its European context only, or more specifically in its British context, or we should take this concept elsewhere. We should try to broaden its implications. When you studied modern British literature, and when we study modern British literature, there are certain authors, certain figures which are very much in our minds. And there are many other authors, many other, say, works which probably are not discussed in the discussion of modernism. So that is also one angle which we will be looking into. Now let us quickly define the word in relation to other words also, and that will give us a chance to define other words as well. You know, before modernism, in English literature, which period reigned supreme in when we are talking about English literature and you have studied modern British literature. So modern British literature, you have studied many of those authors. Which are the authors that you studied in modern British literature paper? Now I am asking your opinion. And can you speak about
Portrait
the
of
period?
Artist,
Yes.
and then there was Somerset Maugham. Then we have Virginia Woolf, modern author again. Then we can have the most famous modern poet, T.S. Eliot.
Right.
That's how it's
In fact, if one talks about modernism, then some names are more important than others. And a particular date is more important than all other dates. And that date is 1922. Because this was the year when James Joyce's Ulysses was published, and Ulysses is considered a Bible of modernism. Then T.S. Eliot's Wasteland was also published. Wasteland is considered a very important movement in the history of modernism, especially when we talk about poetry. And then there is another work that you have studied, and that is also a modernist work, Jacob's Room. And of course, there are scores of writers in the continent which you have studied, but roughly we are thinking about these writers. Of course, we can also think about Marcel Proust, we can think about Kafka, and so on. And before the period of modern British literature, there was a particular kind of literature that you studied. It also had a particular name, and in your syllabus, you studied Victorian literature, right? So, roughly speaking, Victorian literature comes before modern literature, and we are here talking about the period also of Victorian literature. But Victorian literature hides certain major features which in fact characterize it as Victorian literature. You know that literary periods often get their names from some important rulers, or they get their names because of a certain important tendency which characterizes the work of a certain period. So Victorian period in this case, and in earlier periods, Elizabethan literature, they are given these names because the ruler at that time was Queen Elizabeth, and the ruler at the other time was Queen Victoria. But what was the dominant technique which defined Victorian literature, and which was the dominant form of writing during the Victorian period? If not dominant, at least the most important form of writing during the Victorian period. So here, this gives us a term, realism. Realism. And if you think about realism, realism basically means trying to faithfully record events of life. It means the writer tries to faithfully record all important details of life. And there is a word, that word is verisimilitude. Verisimilitude. He tries to say, he tries to follow this idea of verisimilitude, where he is very close to life, very close to life. That means recording all events, recording all possible details of life. And in a way, the writer also tries not to idealize, not to escape, right? So, accuracy of description is important, and escape from life is ruled out. Idealization of life is also ruled out. And this was a major form of writing. If you see many of those important names in Victorian literature, what is Charles Dickens doing? What is Thackeray doing? And you can immediately see that Dickens writes novels in a very different manner from how Virginia Woolf wrote her novel Jacob's Room, right? So that means Victorian novel essentially was the apogee of realism, and all important writers. George Eliot was a very important name. In the United States of America, you had somebody like William Dean Howells, Mark Twain, right? They are important names in American literature, and they are considered realist writers. And of course, Henry James also, though his realism touches aspects of psychology, and so psychological realism. That is one variant of realism. But then you get a slice of life reading Victorian literature. In fact, this this also is considered a technique, and try to remember your lectures on structuralism, where when we talked about Rene Barthes, and Rene Barthes talked about a certain classical French style of writing which was supported by a certain ideology, the ideology of the bourgeois ideology. And when that bourgeois ideology started failing, the novels which were based on that ideology, or the works which were based on that ideology, they also started disintegrating. And so you saw a very different style emerging gradually. You saw somebody like Flaubert, you saw, and many other writers also. So something which was very much the case in Balzac's writing, and remember Roland Barthes talking about Balzac, that was not the case when Flaubert appeared on the scene. So realism means the writer tries to be accurate to life. The writer tries to be faithful to life. The writer tries to faithfully record events, things, and he, in a way, is documenting life. But try to understand this word's difference from another word, naturalism. Naturalism. Because naturalism is also considered a form or an extreme form of realism. But there is a major difference. There is a philosophical thesis behind naturalism. One way of talking about naturalism is that, okay, it is an extreme form of realism. And if I can give you a very simple example, if you can see some of those films made during the 70s and 80s in India, say, for example, a film like Par, in which Nasiruddin Shah acted, and many of those films where you do not find any color as such, you don't find too much of a story, and you find characters who are very, very ordinary, and characters are also motivated often by certain impulses, certain drives. That is one particular form of writing which is called naturalism. And it became popular especially in the last decade of the 19th century. Certain novels of Thomas Hardy also take up that technique. So while there is a faithful presentation of life, naturalism is also supported by a kind of philosophical thesis. And that philosophical thesis comes from the work of Karl Marx. It comes from the work of Freud. These are two very important names, right? And of course, Darwin is yet another influence. So what we see here, that in naturalistic fiction, the hero is a very, very ordinary figure. And here you can contrast him with that tradition of epic writing, where in epics or tragedies, you have a hero who is a grand figure, a noble, a king, an emperor. But here, very ordinary man who is very obscure, who does not have any special qualities, who does not appear like a hero, and in the other words, he's a very, very ordinary person. And this person is also, in fact, driven by some drives, some basic human drives. Either he is driven by hunger, and in hunger he doesn't see anything, his only concern is hunger, or there is another drive which dominates him, and that drive is sex. So he tries to, you see that a particular character who appears oversexed, and in a way he doesn't see anything beyond sex. And similarly, there may be a character who doesn't see anything beyond hunger, beyond the satisfaction of his hunger. So in a way, the character is very close to being a kind of animal. Animals are also driven by some drives. So that is that grand idea of humanity, where human beings are very noble, human beings are very sublime, human beings have some kind of supernatural aura about them, human beings are very spiritual. Nothing of the sort would you find in novels which use this technique of naturalism. And if you remember, Joyce also flirts with this technique in Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, where he often describes Stephen, presents Stephen, say somebody who is driven by his, say, drives. So you see that naturalism and realism, and of course after that you have this, say, particular form of writing which is called modernism. And here we are at the moment discussing in terms of periods. You can also go back and you can discover another period, especially literature produced during the medieval, say, period. And in medieval literature, you find another very important genre, and that genre is called romance. Romance. And what happens in romance? You see supernatural elements. You see, for example, adventures of a chivalrous hero. There is a hero, and you also had that tradition of chivalry and a hero on a journey, on a quest, on whatever, and he encounters many things. Romance. So, Fairy Queen, for example, is an example of romance. And in romance, what you see is that often common life is also surrounded by a certain kind of halo. So, you'll find an atmosphere of mystery in many of those romance works, and you'll see that many things appear removed from day to day life. Here, a good example is suggested by this tradition of romance writing in American literature. You see, many important writers in America, and here I have in my mind writers like Herman Melville, writers like Hawthorne. Hawthorne always called himself a writer of romances. He said that no, I'm not a writer of realistic fiction. In fact, realistic fiction had not made its mark at that time. It was only emerging gradually when Hawthorne was writing in, and his most important work, Scarlet Letter, was published in 1850. And Scarlet Letter, those of you who have read Scarlet Letter, how many of you have read Scarlet Letter? Anyone? That will give me a fair idea how I talk about this work, even by way of example. Yes? Nobody's unmuted.
Sir, I have begun reading, but I haven't completed because it's there in the course this time. So we begin reading.
So very briefly, I must give you an idea of this work, because we're also talking about realism and romance, which are often contrasted. If you see this work of Hawthorne, first important thing is that Hawthorne says that he is a writer of romances. Second important thing, American literature has a very different tradition, and that tradition is influenced by this tradition of romance. So whether it was Washington Irving earlier, or Herman Melville or Hawthorne, what you will often see that characters also appear often allegorical. They stand for some ideas. They stand for some ideas. And there is also a kind of symbolic setting. Symbols are very important in a romance. And often there is a description of events and things in non-realistic language. So, for example, even at the very beginning of that novel, you have the setting of Boston. But the writer does talk about geography a bit, but still there are many other indications that the writer is not trying to be very, very realistic. So, for example, he talks about one rose bush at the beginning of the novel, and he says that, okay, when in the entire wilderness everything had withered away, everything had disappeared, how is it that one rose bush survived? Now, those of us who are trained into reading literature, we know that rose is often a symbol. So rose bush can also be a symbol. And then we start reading this novel further and we say, okay, rose bush, it may be a symbol. It may be a symbol of something pleasant. It may be a symbol of something feminine. It may be a symbol of something positive, because otherwise All the entire setting talks about very dark kind of atmosphere. The entire setting talks about very, say, gloomy kind of atmosphere. There is a door at the beginning, and it's a prison door, and this prison door has iron spikes. This prison door has say a kind of ugly vegetation all around it. This prison door appears like a black flower of humanity, and so on. So that is the entire description of prison door. The entire description of the setting is so gloomy. Now there is a purpose why the writer of romances comes out with this. For him, that prison door becomes one with the Puritan crowd, Puritans, who were a very dominant force at that time. And this rose bush signified a certain kind of positivity around that. And this rose bush also suggested the presence of a female prisoner who will be an important character in the novel, who is pitted against many of those, say, elders in that Puritan neighborhood. If we read further, we see that there is a character in the novel, and a kind of fire comes out from his eyes, light comes out from his eyes. And if there is a scarlet letter that one character is wearing, then scarlet letter also gives some light. It can light a dark passage. Now, how is it possible that simply an object made of cloth can light up something? Can an object of cloth light up something? No. So that means there definitely is some symbolism, and scarlet letter which can light up something, or the fire that comes from the eyes, or there are lots of other references in the novel where you can see that Hawthorne is not writing his novel in a manner Charles Dickens was writing at the same time on the other side of the Atlantic. Hawthorne is a writer of romances, and he himself says that he's a writer of romances. And as a writer of romances, he takes greater latitude with his material, greater liberty with his material. So that means romance is also one particular genre of writing. Romance was a very popular genre during the medieval period, when you had those, say, works which were called romances. But romance also appears to belong to one very important genre of our time, that is fiction, novel. And many novels in American literature are called novels, but actually they are romances in terms of the technique which is used in those works. So, romance, realism, two terms. And then we learn modernism. Modernism, in a way, breaks away from many of these things. So, modernism basically breaks away from realism. And what is important for modernism? A kind of liberation, freedom from realism, a kind of liberation from certain traditional genres of literature, a kind of liberation from certain traditional forms of literature. So that means modernism comes with a very different technique of writing. And here also, it is not correct to talk about modernism in singular terms. You can have modernisms even in literature. And similarly, you can also have modernisms when we discuss literature and when we discuss other art forms. And of course, later you will see that even in modernism, you have some varieties, some new modernism, or a very different kind of modernism that you saw in the that you see in the works of writers like George Orwell or even Somerset Maugham. You see, technically, George Orwell also belongs to the period of modernism. Anyone who has read George Orwell? George Orwell?
Yes, sir. 1980.
Who? Yes.
Sir, here. Yes, sir. 1984.
1984 you have read. So you won't call that, say, a kind of work. You have a very different kind of work. I mean, George Orwell had very obvious political intentions. And in fact, if you read a short essay by George Orwell, Why I Write, he says that he doesn't write even a single sentence if he does not think that he can change the world. So he is writing, and he also talks about for many people there can be different kinds of motivations for writing, and people can write for different reasons. There can be, I mean, 1001 reasons for writing something. But in the case of George Orwell, when he's writing, his writing is of writing of commitment. And you see that his writing is very different from the writing which usually characterizes the writing of Virginia Woolf, right, or James Joyce. So that means in modernism also you can see varieties. And in modernism you can also talk about a time period. Roughly you said, okay, after Thomas Hardy or from 1890 onwards, or maybe up to the Second World War, you had modernism, you had the period of modernism, right? So this means this also explains the most important, the most productive period of modernism, which is 1920s, where you had writers like W. B. Yeats, George W. B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot, and many others writing. D.H. Lawrence, Joseph Conrad. I mean, many. They are important names in modernism. But modernism can also suggest a particular kind of genre, and where it is not specific to that early 20th century. Rather, one can see works which can be considered modernist works in earlier periods also. And so, for example, even somebody like Lawrence Stern can be considered modernist. You know that Lawrence Stern is a very important name for many Russian formalists, because one important feature of his art is self-reflexivity. That means when he is writing, he is making it obvious that he is writing. When he is writing, he is making it obvious that he is writing a novel, something which is loved by many postmodernist thinkers. So there one can talk about modernism in terms of a genre which is not bound to a particular time period. And on the other hand, one can talk about modernism in terms of time period. When you studied modernism earlier, when you studied modern British literature, we considered modernism as a kind of time bound concept. Time bound concept. But maybe now we can broaden our definition of modernism. Similarly, modernism, and we can take up this theme later on too, modernism also means that its boundaries cannot be confined. And so you can talk about modernism in the context of United States of America or Africa or India or many other places. But of course, there are certain things about modernism which we must not forget. And what are those things? Say, this kind of writing or modernism or modernist art is basically experimental. Writers are making experiments. Modernist art is also often very complex, very elliptical. In fact, it is said that when you read a novel, a modernist work, you must pay attention to words on the page in the same manner as you do to poetry when you read poetry. Am I clear? When you read poetry, you have to pay attention to each and every line. You have to pay attention to each and every line, and also the placing of each and every line, the word, the sound image, the devices which are used. Usually, when you read fiction, and see, many of us read fiction for say pleasure also, we are not paying as much attention to all those things. We are not offering a kind of close reading of those texts. But it is said about modernist literature that it requires that kind of close attention. So because modernist art, modernist literature is about decreation also. It is about decreation. It is complex, it is experimental, it is about creation, but also it is about decreation. And of course, this is the most important aspect of it, experiments. You see how Virginia Woolf wrote Jacob's Loom. If you tried reading that novel, even 10 pages, you must have realized that why was it that you are not able to follow that novel? Why was it that you are not able to follow a certain kind of chronology? Why was it that it appeared so elusive? And who can talk about Ulysses? We never prescribe Ulysses because it is considered an impossible text, something which is very, very difficult to read. And if you don't know, you must try to read Ulysses on your own. Even if you try to read maybe about 50 pages, that will be an achievement. You'll learn something about Joyce's technique, about his experiments. Uh, Here, I've been talking about Joyce or talking about Ulysses. I just thought about sharing some interesting write-ups with you. You'll find those write-ups very interesting reading. They are long
Sure.
write-ups, and I have in my mind two write-ups. One is on James Joyce and the other is on T.S. Eliot, because these are two very important names in modern British literature. These are two very important names in modernism. So it will be a very interesting kind of reading. When I'm saying interesting kind of reading, that means you would love reading those pieces because they were published in New Yorker. And you know that New Yorker often publishes long pieces. They are examples of literary criticism, but they are not the examples of that kind of literary criticism which I hate. I, as a teacher, I, as a reader, I hate where something is deliberately made very, very, say, where a writer can be a master of obfuscation, a writer can be a master of needless ambiguity, where something can be said in simple manner also. I believe in, say, in this kind of simplicity where something complex must also be, can also be presented maybe in a simple form. But I'm talking about criticism. I'm not talking about, say, literary works where Ulysses is a very fine example of. So these two pieces you would love reading, and I would also try to read them again simply for the sake of reading something which you will love reading. Maybe you can do without them, right? So modernism as such is a broad subject. It can be time bound, it can be genre specific, or it can be discussed in terms of genre, in terms of stance, in terms of style, in terms of temper, and that is also the case with postmodernism. Experiments. And then, of course, we also talk about modernism with reference to architecture, with reference to many other art forms. And you can also see that there are forms of modernism which are very, very celebratory, where we celebrate something new. But there are also forms of modernism which are very, very condemnatory, something which condemn, which reflect a sense of disillusionment, which reflect a sense of disappointment. What is T.S. Eliot's poem Wasteland about? It refers to that aspect. But on the other hand, if you see the work of some architects, especially, and you know that that skyscraper which we identify with American literature, American culture, that skyscraper is very much a signature style of modernism. So there you see that kind of celebration of modernism, celebration of that idea, celebration and condemnation. These two attitudes exist side by side. I stop here and maybe we'll discuss something tomorrow. Try to enjoy this paper. Let me hear something from your class representative, Madiha. Would you like to say something at the end?
Yes, sir. There was a confusion that I had vis-a-vis modernism, which was that when we're talking about let's say the early 1900s, then we say, oh, that is a modern car or a gadget, and then we come to 1950, and then the very upgraded version becomes modern, and even now till today we see, oh, this is a modern car. So modern becomes, in that sense, a state of mind. And also, it can, so what is the difference then between modern and contemporary? Because what is contemporary becomes modern.
Tomorrow we'll have discussion on this kind of terminology also, right? Right. So I understood your question. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Right. Maybe somebody very quickly can say something.